Does Stand to Reason's Greg Koukl have the slightest idea what morality is? Or are we doomed to another video of him rationalizing his views for the religiously gullible? Honestly, this can't be that hard to figure out, but let's watch Greg make a fool of himself once again. I never fail to be surprised or disgusted at the absurdity of religious rationalization, especially recently. As religion loses ground in the West, the religious have to go to extreme lengths to maintain any hint of credibility, and it doesn't take too long to poke enough holes in their claims to drive a fleet of semis through. So here goes Greg Koukl trying to explain why Christianity isn't immoral, and why, as is no surprise, they absolutely are.
There's a meme in play right now that basically says true morality is a morality that is not motivated by the enticement of a reward or the threat of a punishment.
Which means that Christianity, indeed all religious morality, can't be true morality because they all operate by holding out the carrot of eternal life and the stick of eternal damnation. By that metric, it means your own religion can't be moral, which I would agree with. People shouldn't have to be actively rewarded or punished to do what society thinks is the right thing. But go ahead, put your own spin on it. That's what we expect.
If you're doing something because there's a reward involved, or you're not doing something because you fear punishment, well, that's really not morality. No, you know where this is going, or you know the purpose of this, and that is to demonstrate in some way that Christianity is really shallow when it comes to morality.
Who am I to argue with the great Greg Koukl when he kneecaps his own religion, right? He will try to find some way to turn it all around so his side doesn't look nearly as stupid as it actually is. So let's see what arm-waving nonsense he's going to try out this time.
Because after all, people who do good go to heaven, people who do bad go to hell. That's a mischaracterization, but let's just deal with that for the moment.
Because that's actually what it says in your big book of multiple choice. But why do I get the feeling he's going to try to say that what it says in black and white isn't exactly what it means? Because I've watched so many apologetics videos, maybe. Yeah, that couldn't be it.
We'll just accept that for the moment. And so it's meant to show how shallow is that? That's not real morality. Okay, so let me make a couple of observations. Pretty much as far as I know, every religious system that has God in the picture has that kind of system.
Which just makes none of them moral, as I said at the beginning. And I get the impression this is going to go into feelings, not facts. Because declaring that all of these systems are inherently immoral would make people feel really unhappy, so we can't talk about that, can we? But let's see if I'm right.
That is reward for good, punishment for bad. That's the first thing. So if that is shallow morality, the only way to get rid of that shallowness is to get rid of God.
Well, that's a good idea. Or to have a God that doesn't reward or punish humanity. Or to have a God that doesn't propose subjective standards for morality for man to follow. But since just about all religions are really, at their core, a means for human influence and control over other humans, you don't tend to see that, do you?
But the minute you get rid of God, you have gotten rid of morality.
Totally and completely wrong. Morality comes from humans. It always has, it always will. We just made up gods as a means of imposing authority on our moral views, to lend some credibility to our decisions in the form of a super powerful magic man in the sky that can smite us if we don't do what our religious leaders want us to do. And I don't get why the religious can't see this very clear and obvious fact. Maybe because they have a vested interest in making sure it continues.
You cannot be a good moral law keeper for the right reasons, for the right motivations, if there are no transcendent moral laws to keep?
Total bullshit. Atheists do it every day. Maybe that's why we're vastly underrepresented in prison populations, while the religious are vastly overrepresented. Because we do what's right because we care about doing what's right. We understand that morality comes from enlightened self-interest, and therefore we treat people like we want to be treated. But it couldn't be that simple, could it, Greg?
And by the way, don't go to evolution here. This is just not going to work.
Except that it does. Evolution explains it all perfectly, and that's why the religious have to pretend that evolution isn't real, because it does away with all of their religious reasons for believing the insane things that they believe.
If evolution explains our moral impulses, then this whole objection doesn't even apply, because all it does is explain why we believe in a morality that does not exist. We are tricked by evolution to do certain things we call moral that aren't moral to get our genes into the next generation.
How is it not moral? Unless you're going to arbitrarily define these imaginary God-given views moral and simply reject anything that doesn't fall into that paradigm immoral, which is inherently dishonest in the first place. But when it comes to morality, this is pretty much what I see apologists doing all the time. They are so obsessed with the idea of objective morality, morality that is imposed on us and not determined by us, that they simply reject the very idea that such a human-derived morality can exist in the first place, even though clearly it does. Just more religious dishonesty at work.
So this whole discussion about exalted motivations for being moral wouldn't even apply. That's not even in the picture. If God doesn't exist, there is no transcendent morality, and if there's no transcendent morality, there is no moral virtue of any kind, regardless of how you think your actions are motivated. All right?
Oh, please, Greg, yank some more crap out of your religious backside and tell us how right you are. Because absolutely none of this stands up to any kind of rational scrutiny. It's Greg laying claim to the word morality and denying anyone else has any valid use outside of his religious context. And that's stupid.
So you kind of stuck with a system where God makes the moral rules and he also oversees them.
No, you're not. You are stuck with the system because you insist that your religious beliefs have to be true. But there's no reason to think that they are. Running around saying, I'm right because I'm right, and if you don't agree that I'm right, then you're wrong. That's really intellectually dishonest. But hey, this is Greg Koukl we're talking about here, right?
But there's a fundamental flaw, I think, in the whole enterprise, okay? Is it the case that all moral behavior, just think about it, that all moral behavior is somehow disqualified from being really good if there is a reward involved or if there is a threat of punishment? I don't think so.
Well, of course you don't think so, because you benefit from disagreeing. But let's look at this. It depends on why you are acting. Are you acting so that you can get that reward? Or are you acting so that you can avoid that punishment? Is that your purpose in acting or not acting? Because if it is, then you're not being moral. You are using morality as an excuse for a reward. And the religious do that a lot. Take a look at a lot of religious so-called charity. It's not really charity. It's a cover for their real goal, converting the most vulnerable in their time of need. They want to get something out of it. And that's why, to get a sandwich, the needy person needs to listen to a sermon. To get a bed for the night, they have to agree to pray or accept their imaginary friend. The theists are trying to earn brownie points with their God by gaining converts. This isn't a zero-sum game. This isn't morality. This is using people to further your own selfish goals. Welcome to religion.
If both Jesus and Aristotle before him talked about morality in the sense that morality is a thing that you ought to do for its own sense, for its own good, for its own value, okay? Not for some other kind of external reward. So there's some truth to this, but notice even in this case, there's a reward. You live the moral life so you can have the satisfaction of being virtuous. There's a good feeling to being virtuous. There's a bad feeling to being viceful if you're morally in touch. So you can't really avoid, in a certain sense, the equation of reward or punishment. That's kind of built in.
And to a certain degree, that's true. I don't think that there's any such thing as true altruism. A lot of the things that we do gives us that little chemical reward in the brain. It makes us feel good. But the question we have to ask is, why do we do these things? Do we do it for the reward? Is that a conscious decision that we are seeking out that reward? Or is it just something that happens that we didn't intend from the beginning? And I was thinking about this a couple of days ago when I was playing a video game and I killed one of the bosses, and I felt this very distinct sense of accomplishment. And yes, I got that little chemical ding in the back of my head, and I recognized that it felt really good to have beat this milestone in the game. But I didn't do it so that I could get that momentary chemical pleasure. I did it because it was a challenge and I had fun doing it. My goal was not the happiness. My goal was the fun. My goal was succeeding in a challenge. The happiness was just a side effect. But for the religious, far too often, the goal is the reward. It's the only reason they're acting like that in the first place. And this isn't something Greg is likely to acknowledge, is it?
But what about additional stuff? If I am nice to grandma just to get the inheritance, obviously that is an illicit motivation for being nice to grandma.
If you're feeding the hungry just to be able to convert them to your religion, that is an illicit motivation for feeding the hungry. But you still see religious charities shipping Bibles to countries stricken with natural disasters. Not food, not medicine, not trained professionals that can actually help these people. They're sending worthless books that don't address the need at hand because they aren't doing it for the needy, they're doing it for themselves. It's the same reason they'll say, "I'll pray for you." It's such a worthless sentiment. It's for people who want to feel like they're helping while not actually getting off their asses and doing anything worthwhile. Now, sure, maybe there's nothing they can really do, but it's still aimed at their own personal pleasure and not actually helping the person in need. This is ingrained into religion, and the religious refuse to see it.
However, if I'm seeking to be a noble, virtuous person in order to honor God and bring pleasure to God and to be closer to God, well, there, the reward, so to speak, is the appropriate satisfaction for the behavior.
So that you potentially get rewarded by God. And also, so that your brain pumps dopamine into your system so that you can feel good about what you're doing. But we won't mention that part, will we?
Now, C.S. Lewis talks about this, and I wish I could remember exactly where it is, but he points out sometimes there are illicit motivations for doing good, and that does undermine the goodness of the action.
You'd have to point out an example of that, because I don't think that you can. Again, intent is what really matters here. Now, not too long ago, I found a lost dog, and I returned it to its owner. The owner was overjoyed and wanted to give me a $500 reward. And I turned it down and told them to use the money to fix their backyard fence so the dog wouldn't get out again. I did not act for the reward. I acted because it was the right thing to do. And I doubt a lot of theists would do the same thing with regard to their imaginary friend.
Just like being nice to grandma for the sake of getting the inheritance. But there are other things that are the appropriate either rewards or punishments for certain behaviors. And so when you get those rewards, you are not somehow undermining the moral substance or value of the behavior itself. And if you get the punishment, then you are not kind of undermining the legitimacy of that punishment or the behaviors.
Assuming that you actually deserve either of them, which in the case of hell is a totally inappropriate punishment regardless. Eternal torture for a purely temporal crime, if it's even a crime at all, is absurd. And considering that you can go to be punished forever just because you saw no good reason to believe in a deity that doesn't see fit to prove his own existence, that makes Christianity a true moral evil in the world.
Look, if a person becomes a Christian to avoid the punishment that is due them, okay, that's smart.
That you claim is due them. No evidence presented. And no, acting without objectively demonstrable corroboration of a claim is not smart. It's stupid.
Not particularly noble, all right? However, once one is a Christian and their temperament is tuned in to satisfying God, then there's a reward that comes from that, as I mentioned before, that is the appropriate satisfaction of the thing that they're doing without taking away any of the moral quality at all. See the difference there?
No, there is none. This is just, as expected, rationalizing his way around reality for the benefit of his feelings. It's pretending to inhabit the moral high ground while living deep in the immoral valley. How he doesn't see this, I don't understand, but I suspect he doesn't care, just like everything else about his beliefs. It's feels over reals, rationalization over reality, just because it makes him feel good.
So, what we're faced with is a meme that is meant to undermine the shallowness of Christianity.
Hey, it's not our fault that Christianity is so shallow. This has been nothing but doublespeak and hand-waving intended to reassure the faithful that they're not doing it all wrong, but they are. There are certainly good Christians and bad Christians, just like there are good atheists and bad atheists, but the very moral system that Greg pushes is inherently self-serving. It's not there for the good of other people, it's there for the good of the believer. That he refuses to acknowledge that is sad.
First of all, if we get God out of the picture, rewards and punishments, then there's no morality at all. So you forget about your so-called good, noble motivations for doing good, because good does not exist in any ultimate sense, okay?
So after that, he just recaps and repeats everything he said previously, which we've both already seen and taken apart, so I'm just going to cut it here. The level of rationalization and excuses that apologists give to relieve the religious of their responsibility for being such terrible people is just amazing. He used the example of being nice to your grandmother so she'll put you in her will, and said that's a bad thing to do. Yet, I've also given the example of being charitable so that you can score some brownie points with your imaginary friend, which is effectively the same thing, and apparently that's a good thing according to many religious people. And he argues that it's good to make God happy, ignoring the fact that none of us have any good reason to think God is real or to even pretend we know what God actually wants. And when you look at some of the things that Christians have done ostensibly to make God happy, you see the depravity of irrational religion on display. Slavery, murder, denying people equal rights and equal treatment under the law, brainwashing children. The list goes on and on and on. But apparently, that's moral according to the religious. Unfortunately, the religious have no clue what being moral actually is. They wouldn't know true morality if it bit them. And that's kind of expected, isn't it?